Hello, everyone. I am really glad you're here, and I couldn't be more happy to be with you. So what do you think is the most frequently quoted phrase from the Bible? You may not realize how many Bible phrases have worked their way into our culture over the years. Common sayings like forbidden fruit, go the extra mile, fight the good fight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, an eye for an eye, the four corners of the earth, Good Samaritan, fall from grace, labor of love, sour grapes. All those sayings come from the scriptures. But there are also phrases that people use knowing that they come from the Bible. A few years ago, the most frequently cited Bible phrase may have been the opening line of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Or maybe it was the opening line of the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. For certain, and thanks to that guy with the sign at the NFL games, the best known Bible reference has to be which one? John 3:16, for God so loved the world. But I think the most popular Bible concept in our time is this one: don't judge me. Sometimes we use it humorously, don't judge me, but I had leftover dessert for breakfast. For the record, we're not judging, we're jealous. Or don't judge me, but I stayed in my pajamas all day last Saturday. A friend once texted me and said, don't judge me, but I had a dream in which I took revenge on some people who made me angry. I replied, I will not judge you for the dream, but if you woke up in a better mood than usual, I'm judging you, bro. Have you ever defended yourself, maybe even silently, against someone's disapproval or someone's correction by saying, hey, you can't say that because you are not supposed to judge me? Well, Jesus spoke about this, and I want us to explore what he said. Look at Luke 6, verse 37. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others, or it will all come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven. Now, some of you remember the King James translation of part of this verse, judge not, lest you be judged. Now, some people would like for Jesus' words to mean that I get to indulge in my favorite sins, you get to indulge in your favorite sins, and we both agree that we will not judge each other for it. But if you have ever seen that permissive approach play out in a family or in a business or in a church, you know it causes dysfunction and it damages people. James 1:15 says, when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. And that's why the Bible actually teaches that we do have to make judgments about how to live and about what to believe. So if you think do not judge means do not discern right from wrong, then you're going to be misled and you may mislead others. Jesus condemned passing judgment, not practicing judgment. Do you understand what that means? Practicing good judgment, setting a high bar in the environments that you influence, that's a good thing. But when people stumble, when people fall short, the way we think about those people, the way we speak of those people, that matters a lot to Jesus. And the more harsh we are with people who sin, the less mercy Jesus says we can expect to receive. And we're not told exactly who will settle up with us or how it will be done or when the accounts will be balanced. But the inference is that God will see to it. If we are unmerciful to other people, then there will be less mercy for us. Years ago, a book critic reviewed J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and skewered it. He described it as juvenile trash. And the critic later learned that nearly every person in his extended family had read it and loved it. And they just did not talk about it around him. You see, the part of us that enjoys diminishing other people, that is God's least favorite part of us. And he will call us to account for it, he says. Listen to the message, which is a paraphrase of Jesus' words from the same passage in Luke 6. Don't pick on people. Jump on their failures. Criticize their faults, unless, of course, you want the same treatment. Don't condemn those who are down. That hardness can boomerang. Be easy on people, you'll find life a lot easier. Long before social media, long before we ever heard the phrase cancel culture, human beings demonstrated a huge appetite for being judgmental about other people. And social media has magnified it, but it is nothing new. And some would even say being judgmental is fun. It's fun to sit with a friend who has a sarcastic sense of humor and make fun of other people. It's verbal blood sport in which we bludgeon people's reputations just because we can. I mean, we're like the Romans gathering at the ancient Colosseum, but our weapon is words. But rather than talking about those who stumble into a sin, the Bible urges us to talk to them. Galatians 6 verse 1 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path." Now that's a clear instruction, but our normal response to people who are caught up in sin is either a weak response that enables them or an overly harsh response that judges them. We find it difficult to find the high ground between those two extremes. So if you have said nothing to your friend who has fallen away from church, being a part of the church is something that God says He wants for every believer. I mean, that's clear. But if you have a friend who has fallen away from church and you've said nothing, you are likely doing too little. And if you post on social media about how some believers are no longer going to church and you have a condemning spirit, then you're at risk of being judgmental. But if you invite that friend to coffee and you say, "I've missed you at church, I'm concerned about you, will you sit with me this coming Sunday at church?" Then you have found that sweet spot where you are neither approving or judging. If your friend gets legit drunk every time you go out and you gossip about that behavior to mutual friends, you are judging her. If you say nothing at all, then you're allowing her to slide toward alcohol abuse. But if you invite her to go shopping in St. Louis and ask if you can talk about something on the way to St. Louis, then you're showing concern without being judgmental. Do you see how this works? What about your married friend who spends too much time with someone who is not his or her spouse? What about your friend who is verbally harsh with a spouse or with his or her kids? In all these sticky situations, there is a non-response that shows too little concern for the person, and there is a judgy response that is counterproductive and wrong in the eyes of Jesus. What we need to find is the sweet spot where we courageously express concern for people, but we do not delight in condemning people. We do not assume the worst about their hearts and their motives. Now, I do want to warn you, even when you handle these conversations well, the first reaction that you get from someone may be the accusation that you are being judgmental. Who are you to say that to me? Well, the answer should be that you are someone who cares. You know, our church staff, we remind each other of this principle often, that sometimes a person's first response is not his or her best response. That is certainly true of me. Anyone with me? My first responses are rarely my best responses. Sometimes, even when you approach someone with a gracious spirit, their first response will be to believe that you intend to judge them. So keep your composure and give that person time to create a better response. But what is it that does qualify you and me to speak to someone else about his or her sin? Well, Jesus explores what that qualification is in verse 41 of Luke 6. Look at this. Why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying, "Friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye," when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. If you want to be a person who helps the people that you care about address the sin in their lives, then you have to be a person who addresses the sin in your own life. I mean, what a brilliant metaphor this log and speck thing is that Jesus talks about in this part of his teaching. I mean, it's the perfect filter for helping us to know if we have what it takes to help someone address the sin that is in their lives. If you feel like you have no business saying something to someone else about their sin, then you are probably the right person to say something to them. The thing that qualifies you to say something is your suspicion that you are not qualified to say something. Likewise, when you believe that other people's sins are worse than yours, then you are the wrong person to talk to someone else about the sin that is tripping them up. Jesus is talking about spiritual and moral humility here. And if you have it, you will be able to influence many, and God wants you to positively influence people. If you lack this, then your swag will become a drag, and you will not be able to help people. Jesus said, "Let me teach you." And how did he say he would teach us? Because I am humble and gentle at heart. Have we learned that from Jesus? Have we learned what his humility and his gentleness allow him to do when it comes to impacting people's lives? Let's follow his example of humility. So friends, I believe that there are 3 tests that you and I can employ to gauge whether or not we are wrongly judging someone or whether we are rightly trying to help someone recover from their sin. So here are the 3 tests. I want you to think about the last time you may have said something to someone about something that's wrong in their lives, and I want you to see whether or not, I want you to evaluate whether or not you pass these tests. The first is the test of fairness. And by fairness, I simply mean objectivity, impartiality, even-handedness. If you are very harsh with one person, but you are very permissive with another person that you may like more or who is closer to you, then it doesn't pass the test of fairness. A good question to ask yourself is, do I hope God makes the same assumptions about my heart that I am making about the heart and the motives of this person? Because often we hope that God will give us every benefit of the doubt, but we do not give the benefit of the doubt to other people. We take the worst possible perspective on what they've done or what we think they've done. You know, sometimes if we recite something often enough, we end up passing over poignant, powerful words that mean so much. And there is a dangerous line in the Lord's Prayer that many of us have prayed before, and it's this line: "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." Now, that might mean that we should be forgiving people at the same time the Lord is forgiving us, but one way you can read that is that we're asking God to forgive us the way we forgive other people. Lord, forgive what I've done against you like I have forgiven people who have done something against me. Are you willing to pray that to God? God, I want you to forgive me in the same way I've been forgiving of others. A harsh man once told John Wesley, "I never forgive a disloyal man." And Wesley replied, "Then it is good, sir, that you have never sinned, for that is disloyalty to God." When someone hurts you, when someone angers you, do you make a point of bringing it up over and over again? Do you get as much mileage as you can from that offense? Do you nurse a grudge, as people used to say? When I am in the second car in line at a stoplight, I give the first car in line and the driver of that car the standard 0.004 seconds to begin pulling away when the light turns green. And if it is 0.005 seconds, I begin to get impatient. I went to the Cobra Kai driving school, motto, no mercy. But when I am in a strange city trying to pull up another route on my maps program, I want the people behind me to assume that my slight delay is a reasonable one. We don't like to admit it, but we have a different set of assumptions and a different set of rules for the people driving the car in front of us than we do for ourselves when we're the first car at the light. And this is what Jesus is warning about. Do not condemn others, or it will come back against you. Condemnation given will be condemnation received. But what happens when you choose to show mercy to people? Verse 38 of Luke says, give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together, to make room for more, running over, poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. You see, the judgment that we project will be matched, but the mercy we extend will be multiplied. What wonderful news that is. That if you and I will allow God to change this part of our hearts, this judgmental impulse that we have, that it is going to come back to us in mercy upon mercy, grace upon grace. Don't you want that for your life? God is offering it if you and I will stop judging other people. So here's a warning to take from this. Resist magnifying the sin of others while minimizing your own. People almost never talk about their own sin as if it is worse than it was. But we often talk about the failures of other people as if they are worse than they are. And why shouldn't we do that? Because it's unfair, it is dishonest, it is dangerous. Why? Because God is taking notes. So be careful about wanting the school principal to lower the boom on those other kids. Because you may want mercy for your child or your grandchild at some point. And resist the urge to hope that other employees are put under the microscope. Because someday a close look at your work might reveal a weakness. And think carefully before you hope that the other party's candidate is thoroughly investigated, because your party's candidate may be on the hot seat and under investigation eventually. Romans 2 verse 1 warns, you may think you can condemn such people, but you are just as bad and you have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself, for you who judge others do these very same things. Do you really want the measure you use for others to be applied to you? Or do you want a truckload of mercy for yourself and a teaspoon of mercy for other people? You have to pass the test of fairness. The second test you and I have to pass when we are judging is the test of humility. I read about 3 baseball umpires who were arguing about which of them was the best at his job. The first umpire said, I call them the way I see them. The second umpire said, I call them the way they are. And hoping to top the first 2, the third umpire said, they ain't nothing till I call them. And that is how a lot of people feel about their own opinions and perspectives. It's nothing until I call it. I decide what's right, what's wrong, what's permissible, what shouldn't be allowed. Some people actually believe that their perspective on something makes it true. If it doesn't offend them, then it can't be a sin. If it does offend them, then it has to be a sin. You know, when my kids were small, and like when they're in their junior high and high school years, and they would question something, your kids probably don't do that to you, but my kids sometimes questioned things that I said, and sometimes my response would be, hey, if you don't believe me, just ask me. And my daughter said she always hated it when I would say that, but now she loves to tease people using that line. You see, some people feel no obligation to seek the truth because they actually do believe that their perspectives and their preferences are the truth. And that is the polar opposite of humility. And if you think that your judgments of other people are automatically true, you are not passing the test of humility. Jesus asked, how can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Jesus says we look ridiculous, we fail the test of humility when we regard our own sins as tiny and insignificant, and we insist that the sins of other people, the wrongdoing of other people, the mistakes of other people are deep and serious. And God wants to see the opposite attitude in us. He wants our greatest disappointment to be over our own sins. Friend, there is a huge plank in my eye. There's only a little dust in yours, and I'll help if you want me to. That is such a different spirit. So Jesus is talking to the married person who has many weaknesses as a person and as a spouse, but who cannot stop complaining to and about his or her spouse. And Jesus is talking to the person with questionable ethics who just hasn't been outed yet, but who has a lot of condemnation for people who have. And Jesus is talking to the person who always asks so much of other people, but who complains that no one else is pulling his or her weight. I read that Charles Darwin, the father of modern evolution, had a very critical spirit. He went to a restaurant with his wife one night, and he grumbled that the room was too drafty. He complained the service was too slow, the water wasn't chilled, the food was cold, the vegetables weren't fresh, the meat was overcooked, complained about everything. So at the end of the evening, the restaurant manager said to Darwin's wife, "Ma'am, I'm sorry your husband had such an unhappy night." And Darwin's wife replied, "On the contrary, sir, he was delighted. Nothing gives him more joy than finding fault in others." And it would have been like classic if she had finished her statement by saying, "Perhaps he'll evolve." We need to pass the test of humility. The third test that you and I must pass when we're judging other people is the test of love. You know, it didn't register with me at first, but after looking at this passage, I noticed an interesting word in the way that Jesus set up the characters in this teaching. Look at verse 41 of Luke 6 again. Why worry about the speck in whose eye? In your friend's eye when you have a log in your own. Who is this person that we are judging? Well, Jesus says it's a friend. In some versions of the Bible, it's a brother. That doesn't always mean a blood relative. It sometimes means simply someone we are close to or someone that we choose to view as a brother. You know, I have a few friends who, when they text me, refer to me as brother. It's not literal. It is a term of endearment. It says, I care about you. You're not just another guy. You're a brother to me. And Jesus is subtly saying, in the way that he's laying out this teaching, that when we are trying to point out someone else's wrongdoing or sin, it is so important for us to view that person as a friend, as a brother, someone we care about. Now, there are times when the people that we judge most harshly are the people closest to us. Family, friends, brothers and sisters in the faith, neighbors, teammates, peers. In fact, some of us consider ourselves the divinely appointed judge for everyone who is close to us in any circle. And the thing we bring to all of our relationships is judgment. That is not how you want to be known. But another way to understand what Jesus is saying is that the people we presume to correct should mean something to us. And that we shouldn't attempt to correct someone or to help someone overcome their sin until we can say that we truly do care about that person. You see, when evaluation, when correction is divorced from love, it becomes judgment. Think about all those harshly worded reviews that you've seen people post on Google, on Facebook. at the end of one of those spicy tirades about awful food and awful service and awful environment, have you ever read this comment? By the way, this restaurant is owned by my best friend. See you at the golf course on Friday, buddy. No. Does anyone conclude a 1-star review by saying, see you soon, Mom? No. Because when you are in judgment mode, you either do not have a relationship with that person or you do not care about having a relationship with that person. And Jesus says that's a problem. Because anyone that you attempt to do this with should be someone you choose to care about. And one of the things Jesus is subtly teaching is that we should judge everyone as if he or she were a beloved friend. Why? Because that is the only way to pass the test of love. Don't you judge people differently when you love them than when you don't? And love everyone always, it should be more than a seasonal theme and a Facebook photo frame for us, for this church. In John chapter 8, we read one of the most poignant events that ever happened in the life of Jesus. A woman is caught in adultery, and she is brought before Jesus. The passage says she was caught in the act. So I imagine her being dragged before Jesus, wrapped in a sheet, humiliated. And when those who accused her found Jesus, they reminded him that the law of Moses requires adulterers to be stoned, put to death on the spot. Purge the evil from among you, Moses said. Jesus did not make excuses for her behavior. He did not dispute their recollection of the law. He apparently agreed with their memory of it. But Jesus had several problems with their request, and they're the same things that we are talking about today. He had a problem that their request did not pass the test of fairness. They did not want the same punishment for every adulterer. I mean, one person was noticeably absent from the scene. You know who it was, right? The man who was committing adultery with her. Maybe they knew him. Maybe they were protecting him. Maybe they cared more about him than they cared about this woman. Whatever the reason, the way they were judging her was not objective, even-handed. It was not fair. And their request also failed the test of humility. They believed that they had the right to demand that Jesus endorse this woman's death. What they really believed is that they were good enough to drag this woman in front of Jesus and demand that she be executed. They failed the humility test. And they did not pass the test of love. They were not appealing for mercy for her in spite of the law, as they would have if they or someone in their families had been caught in the same sin. The obvious truth is they did not care about this woman. They only wanted to use her in order to trap Jesus and to make him more unpopular. She was a pawn. She was collateral damage. They totally failed the test of love. A few minutes later, a few minutes after they brought her to him, Jesus actually welcomed them to proceed with the stoning. But the first stone had to be thrown by someone worthy, someone who had no sin. Verse 9 of John 8 tells us how it all resolves. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." You notice the difference? Jesus says, "Sin no more." He's telling her what she did was wrong. But he's also saying, I'm not going to choose to condemn you for it. That's not the way I want to treat you. I want mercy for you, not judgment. Fairness says what you did is wrong, but I want you to receive as much grace as I've received. Humility says, look, I probably deserve forgiveness even less than you do. And love says, I want the best for you no matter what you've done. Jesus said, do not judge others, and you will not be judged. I don't know about you, but I want to accept that offer. I don't want the sternest possible judgment from Jesus when it comes to my life and my actions. I don't want judgy thoughts and judgmental words to characterize my life so that Jesus has to show me less mercy. And my question for you is, what is it going to be for you?